They say heaven borrowed his voice, but if you knew where it came from, you'd never call it heaven again. Bobby DeBarge could sing like silk, soft, seductive, flawless. A falsetto so pure it made women cry and grown men jealous. But behind that sound was something unspeakable, a secret buried inside a Detroit house that smelled like whiskey and fear. His father was a white man, his mother a black woman with 10 children and nowhere to run. And every night, Bobby learned that silence could hurt more than fists. Because when his father's rage filled the room, music became the only safe place left. Years later, under the bright lights of Motown, Bobby looked like the dream. Golden hair, perfect smile, satin suit, frontman of Switch, platinum records, fans screaming his name. But the cameras never showed the shaking hands, the shame, the needles. They never showed the boy who still woke up sweating from the memories. He sang about love because he was searching for it. He wrote about tenderness because he'd never felt it. And the world, oh, the world believed every word. But talent doesn't save you. It just gives your pain a prettier sound. This is not a love story. It's a confession wrapped in melody. The rise and ruin of a man who sang his way out of hell and never truly made it out. This is the story of Bobby DeBarge. Before Bobby DeBarge became the golden voice of Motown, he was just a terrified boy in a cold Detroit house, a house where hymns and screams shared the same walls. His father, Robert DeBarge Sr., was white, a former soldier with a temper that could split glass. His mother, Etherline Mama DeBarge, was black, soft-spoken, God-fearing, holding 10 children and no way out. In 1,950 seconds America, that marriage was already rebellion. But inside their home, it was war. Every child carried a scar, but Bobby carried the deepest. He was physically and sexually abused by his father from a young age, a wound that never healed, only hid. He learned to smile through it. He learned to make pain sound pretty. That's how music started, not as joy, but survival. On Sundays, the family would sing in church, harmonizing to gospel hymns that promised heaven while living through hell. Neighbors would whisper, "That DeBarge family can play anything by ear." Huh? They didn't know those harmonies were stitched together from broken nights and bruised hearts. Bobby found comfort in sound. He'd sit by the window for hours, replaying melodies in his head, trying to rewrite his life through rhythm. Music became his way to talk to God, not in words, but in falsetto so high they almost sounded like prayers. But school was no escape either. Being biracial in Detroit's East Side during the 1960 seconds meant you didn't belong anywhere. Too light for the black kids, too dark for the white ones. The DeBarge children lived in between, never fully accepted, always looked at. Every insult, every slur, every stare became fuel for Bobby's fire. He started performing with his brother Tommy, playing gigs at local clubs, earning a few dollars, a few smiles, and a taste of freedom. By 17, he was already obsessed, chasing perfection like it owed him peace. His voice wasn't just talent, it was a weapon, a way to silence everything that once hurt him. But pain has memory, and even as music carried him forward, the darkness followed close behind. In 1975, a friend got him a chance to play piano for Barry White. It was the break every kid dreamed of, but the timing wasn't right. Barry went solo, the gig vanished, and Bobby went back home disappointed, restless, lost. That's when heroin found him. At first, it was a friend, a relief, a small quiet between storms. Then it became the storm itself. While his friends left for Los Angeles chasing record deals, Bobby stayed behind, chained to the needle, watching his future drift away. He was 20, gifted, and already drowning. But fate wasn't done with him yet. One of his old bandmates, Greg Williams, called months later. "We're meeting with Motown. Jermaine Jackson loves our demo. Get clean and get out here." And for the first time in years, Bobby had a reason to fight. He hit cold. No rehab. No help. Just willpower and pain. And when he walked into that LA studio, thin, shaking, but sober people said, the moment he opened his mouth, even Barry Gordy went still. Because Out of all that suffering, something divine had been born. A voice so pure, so haunting, that for a while, even Bobby believed it could save him. When Bobby DeBarge stepped off that bus in Los Angeles, he wasn't just chasing a dream, he was running from ghosts. He'd left behind the streets of Detroit, the heroin, and the memories that clawed at his sleep. All he carried was a demo tape and a voice that didn't belong on Earth. The late 70 seconds were Motown's new dawn. The Jackson 5 had grown up. The disco ball was spinning. And Berry Gordy, still the king of black music, was looking for the next sound that could melt through radio static and cross over to white America. That sound walked into his office wearing a borrowed suit and fear in his eyes. Bobby sat at the piano, closed his eyes, and let it happen. When he hit that first falsetto, you could have sworn an angel cracked the ceiling. By the time the song ended, Gordy didn't ask questions. He just said, "You're signed." The group called themselves Switch because every member could switch between instruments and vocals mid-song. 6 young men from Michigan with style, soul, and swagger. But it was Bobby's voice that turned them into gold. In 1978, they released their self-titled debut album under Gordy Records, a Motown imprint. The single There'll Never Be hit like lightning smooth, sensual, impossibly perfect. Within months, it climbed into the top 10 R&B chart and went platinum. Radio hosts described it as silk-made sound. Women wrote letters saying the song played at their weddings. Men tried and failed to hit those notes in their cars. For Bobby, it was everything he ever wanted. Validation, applause, purpose. He stood center stage in a white suit, microphone glinting, lights haloing his blonde hair. Every eye on him. Every note flawless. And yet, beneath the glamour, his hands still trembled. The second album, Switch 2, came in 1979, another success. Songs like I Call Your Name cemented their place as R&B royalty. Rumors said Bobby wrote it for LaToya Jackson, his then girlfriend. A love that burned fast and quiet. When it ended, so did his peace. The fame that once cured him began to feed the sickness. Heroin returned, soft at first, a little to calm the nerves, a little to sleep after the shows. But the little never stayed little for long. On tour, he'd disappear for hours before soundcheck. Bandmates learned not to ask. When he sang, he was transcendent. When he stopped, he was unreachable. Still, to the world, Switch was unstoppable. They were young, polished, sexy, the blueprint for groups that would come decades later. Ready for the world. Mint condition. New edition. They all took pages from Switch. But behind the studio walls, Motown was shifting. The industry that built Bobby up began to move on to his younger brothers, Al, Randy, James, Bunny, Chico, forming the next DeBarge generation. Bobby and Tommy wanted to help them, to keep the family together under the same dream. They left Switch, one album left on their contract, believing they'd be part of the DeBarge legacy. But legal red tape and addiction kept Bobby out. It was the cruelest irony. He'd built the door, but when it opened, it was his brothers who walked through. And while they rose under the Motown spotlight, Bobby's light began to flicker. He once told a friend, "It's funny I gave my life to music, and it keeps giving it back broken." At the height of his success, surrounded by gold records and fame, Bobby DeBarge was already falling. He just hadn't hit the ground yet. Success never cured Bobby DeBarge, it just gave him nicer rooms to suffer in. By 1980, Switch was still selling records, but Bobby's eyes had gone dim. The fame that once felt like redemption now felt like a cage lined with mirrors, every reflection showing someone he didn't recognize. The drugs had come back quietly, then loudly, and this time they brought company, paranoia, loneliness, shame. When his relationship with LaToya Jackson ended, it wasn't just heartbreak, it was collapse. She was the one person who saw through the glamour, who knew the pain behind the voice. After her, Bobby spiraled. Friends said he'd sit alone in hotel bathtubs for hours, nodding off, whispering to himself like he was arguing with ghosts. Motown started losing patience. Missed rehearsals, missed interviews. Rumors of heroin needles found in dressing rooms. By the time the third album dropped, the label had already shifted focus to the next generation, his own brothers. The DeBarge family had arrived. Younger, prettier, easier to manage. While Al and Bunny were being groomed as the new Motown faces, Bobby the architect was fading into the background. He'd built the bridge they were walking on, but no one was looking back. Out of loyalty, he and his brother Tommy left Switch to help launch the family band. But legal contracts from Gordy Records tied their hands. They couldn't record, couldn't tour, couldn't even appear in press photos. Bobby was stuck, half famous, half forgotten. That's when the heroin took over completely. He said once, "When I sing, I feel alive. When I'm not singing, I need something to help me stay dead." Music became the high he couldn't afford. Drugs became the only one he could. Motown gave him one last chance, a solo deal. But addiction doesn't read contracts. Studio time turned into disappearances. Sessions turned into apologies. Within months, they dropped him. With no label, no money, and no control, Bobby went back to Detroit, a ghost among his own family. The younger DeBarges were climbing the charts with All This Love and Rhythm of the Night. Bobby would listen on the radio, proud but hollow. He was their mentor, their teacher, their pain, and yet he was no longer part of their story. Desperation turned to survival. He started dealing on the side, running with his younger brother Chico, trying to keep up with bills and habits. The same hands that once played piano for Berry Gordy were now counting dirty cash in motel rooms. Then came 1988. Grand Rapids police raided a house. Bobby and Chico were arrested for trafficking. For the first time, the falsetto king of Motown was silenced 5 years behind bars. In prison, the silence was unbearable. There were no microphones, no applause, no escape. The same cycle that began in his father's house: violence, shame, power, replayed inside those walls. Some said he turned inward. Others whispered darker things. His brother later admitted, if Bobby got AIDS in prison, it wasn't from drugs. It was from what happens in there when you're broken and beautiful. When he got out, Bobby wasn't the same. The glow was gone. His body thin, his voice rasped, his skin pale. He was only in his 30s, but looked twice that. And though he still tried to make music again, the world had moved on. What heroin didn't destroy, time did. What fame had promised, prison had stolen. And what love could have healed never came back. Bobby once sang, "There'll never be." And for him, there never was again. When the prison gates opened, Bobby DeBarge walked out a free man, but freedom had a new definition. His hands shook, his body was frail, and the same world that once screamed his name now looked away. He went back to Detroit, to the same streets that once raised and ruined him. But something had changed, something deeper than addiction, something colder. He was sick. At first, he thought it was exhaustion or withdrawal. Then the weight dropped. The fevers came. And the doctors said the word that, in the 1,990 seconds, still sounded like a death sentence: AIDS. For years, Bobby had sung about love, desire, connection. Now he was untouchable. The same industry that built him on seduction now recoiled from his name. Record labels wouldn't meet. Radio stopped calling. Even some family members kept their distance, not out of cruelty, but fear. Because back then, people didn't understand HIV. They only understood stigma. He told his brother Chico, "They say I got a disease, but really, I've just been dying since I was a child." Still, he tried to make music. He recorded demos in small studios, his voice thinner, cracked, but still beautiful. Every note sounded like it was bleeding. There was no more showmanship, no more performance, just truth. He was singing from the edge now, and every song felt like a goodbye. The industry had moved on to new idols, younger, shinier, cleaner. The DeBarge name was fading, and Bobby, the one who started it all, was living in the shadows of a legacy he built but could no longer touch. In interviews, Chico would later say, he wasn't angry. He was just tired. Tired of being hurt. Tired of being judged. He just wanted peace. But peace didn't come. Not in a world that still punished men for being vulnerable. Not in a country where black artists with AIDS were whispered about, not mourned. Magic Johnson's announcement had made headlines. Bobby's diagnosis didn't even make the papers. By 1995, the disease had taken over. He spent most days at home, curtains drawn, writing in notebooks no one would read. Sometimes he'd sit at the piano and whisper the old songs, "There'll never be," "I Call Your Name," and stop halfway through, out of breath. On the 16th of August, 1995, his mother found him silent, hands resting on the keys. He was 39. The world barely noticed. But for those who remembered musicians, fans, brothers, the grief ran deep. Because Bobby DeBarge wasn't just another fallen artist. He was a mirror of what America refused to see. A man born in violence, destroyed by silence, and remembered only by the sound he left behind. He once sang, "There'll never be another love like this." And he was right. There'll never be another voice like his. When Bobby DeBarge died, there were no headlines, no grand farewell, no public vigil, just quiet, the kind that follows when the world forgets someone too soon. But music has a longer memory than people do. And long after the applause faded, his voice kept echoing. You could still hear it in lovers' bedrooms, in late-night radio shows, in the silence between heartbeats, that high, trembling falsetto that once made the world stop. His brothers, El, Randy, Chico, and his sister Bunny, carried his spirit into every song they sang. They spoke of him softly, like speaking his name might break something holy. Because Bobby wasn't just their brother, he was their beginning. Without him, there would have been no Switch, no DeBarge, no blueprint for the sound that defined 1,980 seconds R&B. Years later, musicians who had never even met him would cite him as influence. Usher, Maxwell, D'Angelo. Every time a man dared to sing with both power and vulnerability, that was Bobby's ghost coming through the mic. And then, in 2019, nearly 25 years after his death, his story finally found light. TV1 released The Bobby DeBarge Story. For the first time, the world saw the full picture, not just the fame, but the trauma, the beauty, and the unbearable cost of surviving it. Audiences wept, because behind the music was a boy who never got to heal. A man who kept giving love to a world that didn't know how to give it back. Today, when fans talk about Bobby, they don't just talk about the hits. They talk about the courage to sing about tenderness in a world that mocked softness. To be vulnerable when masculinity was armor. To turn pain into art and shame into sound. He once said, "Music is where I hide the truth." But maybe, in the end, the truth was all that remained. Because somewhere, in every dim-lit bar where slow jams still play, in every voice that dares to break while reaching high, you can still hear him. That fragile, fearless falsetto cutting through time, whispering forgiveness into the dark. He came from chaos, but left us harmony. He lived in pain, but gave us love. And though the world forgot his name, the music never did. This was Bobby DeBarge, the angel who sang in hell and taught heaven how to listen.